Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom talks about reforming education, government, taxes, and he discusses his lifetime struggle with dyslexia. Also, has Orange County seen its best days? A troubling new report right now on Inside OC. Inside OC is brought to you by 5 Point. 5 Point is an independent real estate development company with assets under management across California. 5 Point is a proud sponsor of public television and community programming.
Memorial Care is transforming the way healthcare is delivered, keeping our communities and businesses healthy by guiding them on the path to wellness with easily accessible hospitals, physician offices, and outpatient centers. Memorial Care, leading the way.
Hi, I'm Rick Reiff. Welcome to Inside OC. Orange County, it's rich, diversified, the job-creating machine of Southern California, right? Well, maybe it's time to think again. There's a lot for us to worry about. Urbanologist Joel Kotkin is here to discuss his provocative report. But first, more with California Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom. He spent a lot of time in this studio recently discussing a wide range of topics, including his plans to run for governor in 2018. And then he joined the panel for a whole other show on Prop 64, the ballot measure to legalize pot that he strongly favors. But Newsom still had a lot more to share with our studio audience, so we've decided to show you that right now. We begin with Newsom's thoughts on education.
Part of this economic gap is an education gap. And I was wondering how you would go about addressing that, specifically looking at those students who either drop out or get out of high school without the skills to enter into our new economy.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most important thing we could education reform is you got to begin at the beginning. And as a mayor that did universal preschool and actually implemented it, that's not the beginning. I think the most important intervention is prenatal care. And we have half the births in California are Medi-Cal births. So we have the points of intervention, we're just not making the investments. So I think you've got to begin there. And then preschool clearly is foundational and principled. That's perhaps the most important thing we can do to change the educational system K through 12. That said, I think we have to have a different kind of debate than we're having about what a 21st century education system looks like. And we're talking off the air a little bit about the fact we still have rows of desks, we still have teachers teaching to the test, the sage on the stage, drilling and killing. We don't have the kind of framework of education that enlivens people in terms of critical thinking and grit and perseverance, teach them entrepreneurial skills at scale. And so I'd like to think about the pedagogy a little bit more than we're debating it. Right now we're debating seniority and tenure as if that's the solution to all our problems. There are a lot of states, by the way, without seniority and tenure that are still getting destroyed in the Shanghai Index compared to their world-class peers. And so we've got to look at the pedagogy, we've got to look at technology and flipping the classroom, which we were talking about, but we have to, I think, radically change the way we interact with our kids. I'm a Montessori, I'm a product of Montessori. I got my kids, honestly, there's something there with the relationship between mentors and mentees. You get different age cohorts. You don't have rows of desks. You have people grouped in teams. It's about self-paced learning, self-discovery. It's about critical thinking. The teachers are coaches and mentors. They're critical. But it's not, it's more than just technology. It's a cultural change. And that's the kind of debate we hope to
Well, is anything more one size fits all than the public education system we have now? And shouldn't we have charter schools, choice, parental choice, and that kind of thing, which, as you know, is resisted by the public education establishment, if you want to call it that.
I participated in a lot of charter schools as mayor of San Francisco. They're good charter schools and they're lousy charter schools. I can't stand lousy charter schools. I applaud and embrace enlivened charter schools that are accountable. So I think charter schools play an important role, and I think most people agree with that. But some people think it's the panacea. I don't think the evidence bears that out, particularly at a national basis. California does a little bit better with its charter policy than most other states. But no, I want competition. I want choice. We certainly want choice, and I don't want people to suffer another generation of discussion around reform. We're trapped in a terrible education system. I don't think anyone wants to see that. The governor's done, I think, an exceptional job as the economy's come back to make the kind of investments in trying to address some of the achievement gap issues. And we've had a larger infusion of investment than we've had in any other short period of time in recent memory. But money in and of itself is not the answer. I think it's paving over the old cow path in many respects. I think we have to talk about it, what a 21st century education system looks like.
Okay, fine. In this next segment, Newsom tackles the politically hot topic of public employees unions and their pensions.
I wanted to thank the perhaps once and future governor here for coming into Orange County, the belly of the beast.
Good to be here.
Thank you. You mentioned, both of you, pension issues in terms of looking at the budget, and you talked about rising healthcare costs for retirees, that sort of thing. And then you talked about education, and Rick brought up the problem of, again, public employee unions, the teachers' unions primarily. And I think it's great to talk about these things. How do you get elected by promising reform, knowing that public unions will simply wipe you out? I mean, you haven't got a chance if you mean real reform. They'll let you in if you mean we'll pretend reform, but if you really mean reform, they won't back you.
Yeah, I don't know about that. Maybe I'm naive, maybe I'm a little idealistic, though I've been at this 19 years. And we did a lot of reforms when I was mayor of San Francisco, but we didn't do it in an adversarial manner. We actually created, there was a lot of push. I'll just give you an example. A lot of push. When I was mayor, every mayor was talking about, or a lot of mayors were talking about taking over the school district, as if somehow that was a solution to the problem. My question was, well, then what? And I started asking the question, well, if we did take over the school district, what would we do? And we realized the independent school board and superintendent agreed on 9 out of the 10 things that I was asserting. So what we decided to do was a partnership. We called it a partnership for achievement. And that's when we did universal preschool, and we put arts education back in every classroom. Every child, every classroom K through 12 has comprehensive arts education. We put wellness centers back in our public schools to deal with adolescent mental health, not just physical health. My point is, we developed these partnerships. And we realized we had more in common than others had believed. So that's my perhaps naivete going into this with the California Teachers Association. I think they want the same damn thing that a lot of the reform folks want. But they just have a different approach. And I think there's so much acrimony. It's become so personalized for some of these folks. That's not my debate. That's not my fight there. My fight's for the kids. And I just think we can create conditions where we can talk about reforms in a more enlightened way, and we can actually produce those results.
But if teachers' unions, and I do want to distinguish between the unions themselves and the teachers, who I think are, honorable, 100% of them really want to be in this for the right reason, so I don't challenge you on that. But the unions themselves seem to defend a system that always saddles the poorest kids, the kids in the most marginal communities, with the newest teachers, that is, the least experienced teachers, and in some cases, the worst discipline problems they have. That's where we stick our new, inexperienced, and bad teachers. And when a case came up before the California Supreme Court this year, went to the U.S. Supreme Court, the case of, was it Vargas? Is that right? Vergara, so sorry. Yeah, Vergara, thank you. CTA was on the wrong side of that. CTA is always on the wrong side of reform. So I love your thinking about Montessori, which is, I think, the preference of people in our economic class. But I really don't think that's available at this point anyway, with the current regime, to people who are poor.
So I just, to me, it's not as black and white as that. I see a lot of gray in this area. And my conversations with the CTA, and by the way, just know this, when I ran for mayor, they didn't support me. So you're not talking about someone who's just rolling over here, all right? I just don't see that. A lot of other people see that because they've been fighting these wars. They have trophies on the wall, both sides, for years and years. It's just not my battle. I just see there's so much more in common. And one thing I know is if the approach is adversarial, I guarantee you this, I don't care who's here as your potential candidate for next governor, if their approach is adversarial, they're not going to accomplish anything in the short term. Maybe in the long term, they'll plant some seeds of reform, but I'm not sure I'm going to be around to see those reforms flourish. I don't think the approach to any kind of reform is that kind of acrimony. It's just not my approach to government and governance. We did a lot. I joke that 80%, we said it last night, of my job as mayor was mediation. Yeah. And if you go into a mediation by taking cheap shots at folks and attacking them, I don't think you're going to build trust and you're going to get to any solutions and compromise. So it's not my approach. We're going to push for reforms. I'm not for the status quo. I want to see reforms. I think they're a lot more enlightened than people give them credit for. I really believe that. That's based on my personal interactions and conversations with folks at the CTA. I think there had been in a defensive posture for the last 10, 15 years. and they feel under assault by a certain group of people. And that certain group of people feel under assault by them. I get it. And we've got to figure out a way to bridge this thing. And I just don't think it's going to end well if we continue down this path.
Your point, well taken. And as you can tell, Will has done a little work in this area.
He knows what he's talking about.
But if you look at LA Unified, they have to jump through hoops to get rid of a sex offender teacher.
Yeah, that was.
Do you ever sit
terrible.
down? Have you ever talked to the unions and said, "Hey guys, come on, you got to give here"? I mean, have you ever had that kind of a?
In fact, when Alex Padilla, a good friend of mine, actually introduced a bill to address that specific circumstance, I literally engaged the head of the CTA in precisely that conversation.
And what's their response?
And there was an acknowledgement that on the surface, this is not easy for us to explain our position, and it doesn't look good from our perspective. I won't get into any of the other merits of the conversation that were private. So look, I think there is an understanding and acknowledgement on some of these things. And the first in, first out issues that were, of course, very prevalent when I was mayor because of the economic downturn that were exacerbated, I, trust me, intimately appreciated. Though, by the way, it didn't happen in San Francisco because we had a robust rainy day reserve, which we used. So we had every one of those pink slips we took back. So we didn't have any of those problems. By the way, we also paid for performance. We didn't call it pay for performance, and this is the way you work with the unions. They didn't want to call it pay for performance, but we had differential pay for underperforming schools, hard to teach subjects, and career education, where we actually incentivized and bonused our teachers. So there's ways. Again, maybe you call me naive, et cetera. It's just my approach, and it's been my approach in business, my approach as a mayor, my approach as lieutenant governor. I just think there's ways we can make some real progress without sort of allowing ourselves to be in this traditional mindset that it's black or white, this us versus again mentality.
And finally, Newsom discusses his personal struggles with dyslexia, and he takes on another hot button topic, Prop 13, the constitutional measure that limits California property taxes. Something I'd like to ask you about. I think the audience might be astonished to hear this because when people hear you speak, you're articulate, you're well informed, you have a grasp of so many sources, references. You suffer from dyslexia.
Yeah, pretty pronounced. And it's a way of explaining my answer to the education question, perhaps, and my bias to self-paced learning and individualized learning. Because I basically, that was my track. Because I had an exceptional education because I had alternative education. I had special needs education. I was in the parking lot in the temporary shed with other kids because I couldn't be mainstreamed and bounced around many, many schools.
You have trouble reading?
In very difficult time reading. Spelling is laughable. My writing makes your doctor's writing look proficient and clear and precise. Yeah, it's been my identity because I think it allows you overcompensate in different ways, and you find a creativity gene that makes up for the areas where you're not necessarily, you're not as gifted. It was also, for me, it was a self-esteem issue. My smart sister, and then the dumb brother, and trying to realize that maybe I had gifts that weren't the traditional gifts that a lot of kids have. So look, I have an enormous, special needs education. This gentleman's given his life to. These things are profoundly important to me, and taking care of these kids that are falling behind. And you look at our prison system, a number of folks that share the same same struggles when they were growing up with dyslexia and learning disabilities. It's off the charts. So we've got a lot of work to do to take care of these kids.
You either wind up in prison or in the governor mansion.
I know it's. I don't know if it's that black and white either. But yeah, no. Look. Some of my biggest heroes. Richard Branson is one of my big heroes. Chuck Schwab is a friend of mine now, and all dyslexic. Some of the most gifted business leaders share dyslexia in common. It's actually an extraordinary attribute for a lot of business leadership. And there's something to that. In fact, Malcolm Gladwell in his last book did a whole chapter on the disproportionate number of successful entrepreneurs that share dyslexia in common as an attribute, not a liability. So I'd like to think about it in those terms, but I know how difficult it is for parents. And for my mother, there was nothing more difficult raising me and struggling to address the needs of a young son.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question.
Hi, Monty Kang, local Democrat and independent writer. Two actually very quick questions. this state was known as the flagship of public education, especially when current Governor Brown's father, Governor Pat Brown in the 60s, the UC system and whatnot. Then 1978, Prop 13 happened, and since then there's been loss of revenues, et cetera. A lot of people would like to argue that could you take a look at possibly reforming certain aspects of Prop 13 to bring in more money?
Yeah, I mean, the governor was asked early in his administration would he support the split roll construct. And he said, look, I only do things that I think I'll be successful doing. Even though I think public opinion is there to address the split roll debate. It's tough, right? Because when I wrote an economic development plan, one of the things that was actually highlighted in the plan was our relatively stable commercial property taxes is the one few advantage that we have vis-a-vis other states. So you take that away and create some volatility, you may lose that one advantage. But it is certainly, I think, a debate that we are having, but amongst ourselves in Sacramento. And if you want to change things, you got to change the debate more publicly and have a sustainable conversation. But if you're going to have a Prop 13 conversation, which I'm open to, you have to have it in the context of a debate around your entire tax system. Our tax system needs to be overhauled. This must be a priority. I don't care who your next governor is, it must be a priority. It will be exposed yet again in the next mild recession because it will disproportionately impact our budget in acute ways, even a mild recession, because of our disproportionate reliance on capital gains, on what other Janet Yellen is doing at the Fed, and how high-income earners are doing and faring, and the markets are doing or faring. And so we have to have that conversation in the context of the overall tax structure, protecting seniors, protecting our residential bias that I maintain. But as it relates to any split roll conversation, it's a conversation had in context with broader tax reform.
Okay. Just before I let you go for this segment, I got to ask you about the election. Just your observation about everything that's gone on in this election, and maybe in the bigger context of what's going on globally with this populist uprising, which is not just Trump and Sanders. It seems to be global.
Well, I think the biggest issue that no one's talking about is, and I talked briefly about it or I referenced it in our conversation, is the detonation of IT and globalization. We're focusing a little bit more on globalization as a scapegoat, but not enough about technology. That's changing the way we live, work, and play. The world's going mobile, social, local, cloud, having intense wage suppression. The future of work scares the hell out of me. No one's debating the future of work. It's not been uttered in the presidential debates. It is happening in real time, labor-saving automation. I'm in an incubator. My office, the Lieutenant Governor's office, is in an incubator with 40 startups. I'm steeped in this world. I wrote a book, Citizenville, on these topics. And I just fear that unless we address the changing nature of work, that we are going to have profound social unrest in this country that will make the populism you refer to pale in comparison to what exists today. And I don't think we have done justice to that discussion and debate. And I hope to engender a debate around that in this governor's race, because I think it is the issue of our time that will explain more. There's an old phrase, explains more things in more ways, on more days, in more places than anything else, yet none of us are focused on.
Very good. Well, again, Governor, thanks so much. Lieutenant Governor, thanks.
Thank you.
Freudian slip there, but you loved hearing that.
No
but
one
Lieutenant
edit
Governor,
that.
thank you
No
very
one
much.
edit
Let's give one more hand. All right. Thank you. Thanks again to Gavin Newsom for spending so much time with us. And now, the state of Orange County. A new report says things aren't going as well as some boosters might believe. Joining me to discuss the report he wrote with his Chapman University colleague Marshall Toplansky, Joel Kotkin. Joel, welcome back.
Nice to be here.
Always nice to see you. So you saw that interview with Gavin Newsom. He's got a good shot of being our next governor.
Well, you know, it could be worse. I guess that's what we have to accept when we live in California or in the United States is, well, it won't be good, but it could be worse.
All right, a real ringing endorsement from. So yeah, you have generally been rather critical of the political and the business leadership of California.
Yeah, I think basically the business leadership in California keeps thinking it's going to cut deals with people in the legislature and with the governor. And every time they keep upping the stakes and upping the stakes and upping the stakes. And essentially, California is, going off into some very, very bizarre directions that I think we'll suffer for a long time.
Okay, and that makes a beautiful segue into what you are here to talk about, which is this book, a report that you've come out with called OC Model, A Vision for Orange County's Future. So what's this about?
Well, basically, we start off with the premise that Orange County is in reasonably good shape, certainly much better shape than Los Angeles. It still is a very well-educated, has a well-educated population. It's got some very great cultural attributes, obviously great weather, beaches. So you can make the commercial, hey, it's a good place. Here's the problem. If we traced it over time, and what we found is over time, we're losing our market share in technology. We've lost about 12,000 technology jobs since the 90s. We're being outperformed by Silicon Valley, in some areas by New York, by many areas by Seattle and Austin. These are our competitors. And so we wanted to benchmark us against the competitors. And basically, in most cases, we're not doing so well. There are a couple of good areas. High-tech manufacturing's held up. And
what's that? What's high-tech manufacturing?
A lot of the medical device companies are still rolling, semiconductors. And then probably the most interesting thing is our arts and culture sector is actually doing quite well. And that seems to be an area of strength. So it's not all negative, but the big problem is most of our jobs are low-wage jobs that we're creating, and we have very high housing prices. That's not a sustainable situation.
Yeah, explain that a little more, because you really emphasize that. You talk about let me ask you, how high are Orange County's housing prices, and what's the problem with that?
Well, basically, outside of the Bay Area, we have the highest housing prices. In
California?
In the country, really.
Oh, right.
And that we also have one of the worst ratios between income and housing price growth. So in other words, what's happening is as our prices continue to go on and business community says, this is proof how great we are, at the same time, we're not creating high wage jobs. What's happening is a lot of older people are sitting on houses that have gained tremendously in value over the years. They're staying in those houses. Young people are having a hard time moving in. So one of the really frightening things is by 2040, Orange County may be the oldest major county in the state of California. That's not a good thing.
Okay, and you contrast that with the Bay Area, with the Silicon Valley and San Francisco, for example, where the housing prices are high, but the wages are also high. And you're saying that's not the case in Orange County?
Not so much. I mean, what you see is, and you see immigrants and particularly younger people still moving to the Bay Area. They don't stay necessarily because of the high housing prices, but that workforce is there. I, tried to communicate to our business leaderships, where is your workforce going to come from in 10 years? And I think that they're just asleep at the switch. I think they don't understand what's really going on here. We're very reliant on an older workforce that's well educated, good number of engineers, some very talented people, but we're not replacing those people. But it seems to me that people in Orange County are sort of, too busy enjoying the good life, having a couple of margaritas out in the sun, and they're not paying attention to the future. It's sort of like après-moi le déluge.
Okay, which means to a great phrase, but it kind of like the future will take care of itself.
Right,
Yeah.
after me, the end.
Very good, and that's what I love about your writings is you throw in those little literary allusions. Okay, all right, let me play devil's advocate slightly, because I know that's a compelling statistic, how Orange County's housing prices are so high, but the wages, really aren't. But in a way, I think a comparable area, according to your study, was Manhattan has some of that. Manhattan,
Yes.
New York has that same thing. And isn't that because, in part, some of that real estate in Orange County should really be looked at as it's like an industry. It's people around the world who want to live along the coast, and people drive in from the Inland Empire and some of the other outlying areas, and they service that. That's maybe not such a negative.
It's not a complete negative. Certainly if you own real estate, it's great. But here's the problem. The difference with Manhattan and then Brooklyn, those parts of Brooklyn that are tied to Manhattan, is there's still a lot of high-wage jobs. And they're creating high-wage jobs. And they're expanding in the media. And they're expanding in professional business services. We're not seeing that in Orange County. We're becoming what large parts of it are what we call a NORC, a naturally occurring retirement community. It's a great place to be, you know, an old person. You know, it's low crime, it's clean, it's relatively safe. There are nice amenities. The traffic isn't terrible if you're used to Los Angeles. So there's lots of positives for being here. The problem is we're not creating a positive environment for young people, for entrepreneurs, for new and innovative companies, and that we're going to pay for.
Okay, and finally, if people want a copy of this, where can they go to get this?
Well, you can get it at newgeography.com, which is a website I have.
Newgeography.com.
And you also could go to the Chapman Center for Demographics and Policy, and we have it there.
And they can go to Amazon and get your latest book, a terrific book, The Human City, tremendous histories of cities and all that. Very good. Joel, always a pleasure to have you.
My pleasure, too.
Okay, that's it for now. Thanks again to Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom and urbanologist Joel Kotkin. You can watch this show and past shows by going to pbslcal.org or rickreiff.com. You can also catch us and our post-show open mic chatter on YouTube. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again on Inside OC. Inside OC is brought to you by 5 Point. 5 Point is an independent real estate development company with assets under management across California. 5 Point is a proud sponsor of public television and community programming.
Memorial Care is transforming the way healthcare is delivered, keeping our communities and businesses healthy by guiding them on the path to wellness with easily accessible hospitals, physician offices, and outpatient centers. Memorial Care, leading the way.